Sienna Reed's back hits the cold concrete wall as Officer Dante Cruz's hand closes around her throat. Not violent, but possessive. His twin brother Mateo steps behind her, voice dropping to a rough whisper that makes her virgin body clench with fear and want she doesn't understand. We own you now. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. Before we begin, if you want to hear uncensored stories, the ones too hot for YouTube, check out my Patreon in the description. Now let's get into it. Sienna Reed had never been afraid of much in her 23 years. Growing up in the foster system had taught her to be hard, to fight, to never show weakness. But standing in the processing room of Blackwood Correctional Facility, stripped of everything familiar, wearing scratchy orange that smelled like industrial detergent and 1,000 other women's desperation, she felt fear settle deep in her bones. The officer processing her intake was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes that had seen too much. "First time inside?" she asked, not unkindly. Sienna nodded, not trusting her voice. Her hands shook as she held the uniform they'd given her, and she hated herself for the weakness. "You'll be okay," the woman said, stamping forms with practiced efficiency. "Keep your head down, don't get involved in the politics, and stay away from the guards who look at you wrong. Most of them are professional, but there are a few who think these walls mean the rules don't apply to them." "Which ones?" Sienna managed to ask. The woman looked up, seemed to debate whether to answer, then said quietly, "The Cruz twins. Officers Dante and Mateo. They're trouble. Beautiful trouble that ruins women. Stay away from them if you value your sanity." Sienna filed that information away, though she had no intention of getting close to any guards. She was here because of a mistake, a wrong place, wrong time situation that her overworked public defender hadn't been able to argue away. 6 months for accessory to theft. She'd been in the car when her then-boyfriend had robbed a convenience store, too naive to know what he was planning until it was too late. 6 months that would destroy any chance she had at the life she'd been trying to build. She'd just gotten her GED, had been working 2 jobs to save for community college, had finally started to believe that maybe she could escape the cycle of poverty and bad decisions that had defined her childhood. Now here she was, about to be thrown into a cell with women who'd done things she couldn't imagine, in a place where violence and desperation were the currency of survival. The processing officer led her through a series of locked doors, each one clanging shut behind them with a finality that made Sienna's chest tight. They passed through common areas where women in orange watched her with calculating eyes, assessing whether she was prey or predator, weak or strong enough to be left alone. Sienna kept her face blank, her shoulders back, projecting a confidence she absolutely did not feel. She'd learned young that showing fear invited attack, that the only way to survive was to look like you could handle whatever came at you. Her cell was on the 2nd tier of D block, a small space barely big enough for the 2 narrow bunks, metal toilet, and tiny sink. Her cellmate was already there. A woman in her 30s with hard eyes and arms covered in tattoos that told stories Sienna didn't want to know. "Top bunk," the woman said, without looking up from the magazine she was reading. "Don't touch my stuff, don't ask me questions, and we'll get along fine." Sienna climbed onto the top bunk and lay there staring at the ceiling, trying not to think about the next 6 months, trying not to panic about being locked in a cage like an animal, trying not to cry because crying was weakness, and weakness got you hurt. The first night was the worst. The sounds of the prison, women arguing, guards making rounds, metal doors slamming, someone crying in the cell next door, kept her awake for hours. When she finally did sleep, she dreamed of being chased through endless corridors that all looked the same, running from something she couldn't see but knew would destroy her if it caught up. She woke to a buzzer so loud it felt like it split her skull. Her cellmate was already moving, getting dressed with efficient movements that spoke of long practice. "You got 5 minutes to get ready before they open the doors for breakfast," the woman said. "Move slow and you'll get trampled. Move too fast and someone will think you're challenging them. Find the middle ground and keep your eyes on your own business." Sienna scrambled down from the bunk and pulled on the orange pants and shirt she'd been issued, her fingers clumsy with sleep and nerves. She had no idea what to expect from breakfast, from the other inmates, from any of this. The cell door slid open with a mechanical clank, and women poured into the corridor, a river of orange flowing toward the dining hall. Sienna let herself be carried along, trying to stay close to the wall, trying to be invisible. The dining hall was chaos, hundreds of women all talking at once, the clatter of trays and utensils, guards stationed around the perimeter watching everything with bored efficiency. Sienna got in line, accepted the food that looked like it had been engineered to be as unappetizing as possible, and looked around for somewhere safe to sit. That's when she saw them. They stood near the back wall, two guards who were clearly twins, identical in every way that mattered. Both were tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of build that came from serious time in the gym. Both had olive skin that spoke of Mediterranean heritage, dark hair cropped short, and features so perfectly symmetrical they looked like they'd been designed rather than born. But it was their eyes that caught her, dark, intense, and currently locked directly on her. Sienna felt the weight of their stare like a physical touch, and something low in her belly clenched with a sensation she'd never experienced before. Fear, yes, but also something else, something that made her skin feel too tight and her breath come faster. She tore her gaze away and found an empty spot at a table in the corner, sitting with her back to the wall so she could watch the room. The food was as bad as it looked, but she ate mechanically, knowing she needed the calories even if her stomach was tied in knots. She was halfway through the gelatinous eggs when a shadow fell across her tray. Sienna looked up to find one of the twins standing at her table, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that had no business in a place like this. "Sienna Reed," he said, and his voice was deep and smooth, the kind of voice that could convince you to do dangerous things. "I'm Officer Dante Cruz. My brother and I run security for D-Block. We like to introduce ourselves to all the new inmates, make sure they understand the rules." Sienna swallowed hard and nodded, not trusting her voice. Dante leaned down, close enough that she could see the individual lashes framing his dark eyes, close enough that when he spoke, his breath ghosted across her cheek. "Rule 1. Respect the guards and the guards will respect you. Rule 2. No fighting, no drugs, no contraband. Rule 3. What we say goes, no questions asked. Break any of these rules and you'll find yourself in isolation faster than you can blink. Understand?" "Yes, sir," Sienna managed, proud that her voice came out steady. "Good girl," Dante said, and something about the way he said it, the slight roughness, the approval, sent heat flooding through her body in a way that was absolutely inappropriate given the circumstances. He straightened and walked away, and Sienna could breathe again. She looked down at her tray, her appetite completely gone, and tried to ignore the way her hands were shaking. The woman across from her, someone Sienna hadn't even noticed sitting down, laughed quietly. "The Cruz twins got their eye on you already. Poor thing. You're in for a rough time." "What do you mean?" Sienna asked, alarm spiking through her. The woman shrugged. "They like pretty young things. Fresh meat? They don't break any actual rules, they're too smart for that. But they find ways to make your life very interesting if they decide they want you. My advice? Stay as far away from them as possible." But staying away from them proved impossible. Over the next few days, Sienna noticed them everywhere, watching her during meals, appearing when she was in the yard, somehow always nearby during the few hours when inmates were allowed out of their cells. They never touched her, never said anything inappropriate, but their presence was constant and unnerving. Sienna felt like prey being stalked by predators who were in no hurry because they knew she couldn't escape. On her 5th day, she was assigned to the library for work detail, a coveted position because it was quiet and relatively safe compared to the kitchen or laundry. She was shelving books when she heard footsteps behind her and turned to find both twins standing there, blocking the aisle. This was the first time she'd seen them together up close, and the impact was overwhelming. They were identical, but she could sense subtle differences. Mateo stood slightly more relaxed, his expression softer, while Dante had an intensity that made her want to step back. "Sienna," Dante said, "my brother Mateo and I need to talk to you." "About what?" she asked, proud that she managed to sound calm, even though her heart was hammering. About your safety, Matteo said, his voice slightly warmer than his brother's but no less commanding. You've attracted some attention from the wrong people. There's a group in your block that targets young women like you, pretty, alone, without protection. They make your life hell until you either join their crew or end up in medical. Sienna's stomach dropped. What kind of attention? Dante stepped closer and she found herself pressed back against the bookshelf. The kind that means you need friends with power. The kind that means you need us. I don't understand, Sienna said, though she was starting to. Matteo moved to her other side, and now she was completely boxed in, surrounded by masculine heat and the scent of their cologne, and the overwhelming presence of two men who were used to getting what they wanted. It's simple, Dante said. You agree to be under our protection. We make sure nobody touches you, nobody bothers you, nobody makes your time here harder than it needs to be. In exchange, you follow our rules, you do what we say, and you keep us very, very happy. The implication was clear, and Sienna felt her face heat. I'm not going to sell myself. We're not asking you to, Matteo said, his hand coming up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture that was far too intimate for a guard and inmate. We're asking you to be smart. This place is dangerous for someone like you. 6 months is a long time to spend looking over your shoulder, wondering when someone's going to corner you in the shower or put something in your food. We're offering protection. What happens between us beyond that is just chemistry. Sienna's mind raced. She didn't want to agree to whatever they were proposing, didn't want to trade one kind of vulnerability for another, but she also wasn't stupid. She'd seen how the other women looked at her, heard the whispers, felt the weight of predatory attention from inmates who saw fresh meat and wanted to establish dominance. What exactly are your rules? She asked, buying time to think. Dante smiled, slow and dangerous. You sit at our table during meals. You don't talk to other guards unless necessary. You don't get involved in any of the block politics or crews. And when we call for you, you come. No questions, no hesitation. And if I say no, then you're on your own, Matteo said with a shrug. We're not going to force you, but understand that without protection, you'll be someone else's target within a week. The choice is yours, Sienna. Take your chances alone, or accept that sometimes survival means compromise. They stood there waiting, these two beautiful, dangerous men who held all the power in this place, and Sienna knew she didn't really have a choice at all. She could say no and spend every day in fear, or she could say yes and at least have some control over what happened to her. Okay, she whispered, I accept your protection. Good girl, Dante said again, and this time he let his hand trail down her arm in a touch that was clearly not professional. We're going to take such good care of you. They left her there trembling against the bookshelf, and Sienna had to take several deep breaths before she could go back to work. She'd just agreed to something that would change everything, and she had no idea if she'd made the right choice or the worst mistake of her life. That evening during dinner, she sat at the table in the corner where the twins always positioned themselves. Other inmates noticed immediately, and she could feel the shift in how they looked at her, calculation changing to wariness, predatory interest backing off. The twins stood behind her while she ate, a silent statement of ownership that made her skin prickle with awareness. When she was done, Dante leaned down and said quietly, "Cell check in 20 minutes. Be ready." Sienna's cellmate gave her a knowing look when she returned to their cell. So you made your choice. Can't say I blame you. Better the Cruz twins than the alternative. Just don't fall in love. They go through girls like tissue paper and never look back. Sienna didn't respond. She sat on her bunk and waited, her stomach in knots, wondering what cell check actually meant. When the twins appeared, her cellmate suddenly remembered she needed to be somewhere else, practically running out of the cell. The door slid shut behind her, and Sienna was alone with Dante and Matteo in a space barely big enough for one person. "Stand up," Dante commanded, and Sienna obeyed on instinct. They circled her slowly, assessing, and she fought the urge to cross her arms over her chest. She was still fully clothed in her orange uniform, but under their gazes she felt naked and exposed. "Tell us something, Sienna," Matteo said conversationally. "Have you ever been with a man?" Her face flamed. "That's none of your business." "Everything about you is our business now," Dante corrected. "Answer the question." Sienna lifted her chin, trying to hold on to some dignity. "No, I haven't." The twins exchanged a look that made her nervous. "You're untouched?" Matteo asked, something like wonder in his voice. "Yes," she said defensively. "Is that a problem?" Dante's smile was predatory. "Not a problem, a gift. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious?" She didn't like where this was going. "You said you weren't going to force me." "We're not," Dante assured her, "but we are going to teach you, slowly, patiently, until you understand exactly what it means to be ours." Matteo stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her face with surprising gentleness. "We're going to make you feel things you've never felt before. We're going to show you pleasure you didn't know existed, but we're going to take our time, because once we start, there's no going back." "I don't understand," Sienna said, her voice barely a whisper. "You will," Dante promised. He reached out and traced one finger down her throat, across her collarbone, the touch feather-light, but electrifying. 6 months is plenty of time to teach you everything you need to know about being touched, about being worshipped, about surrendering control to men who know exactly how to take care of you." Sienna's breath came fast and shallow. She should tell them to stop, should push them away, but her body wasn't cooperating with her rational mind. Instead, she stood frozen as Dante's finger continued its path lower, tracing the edge of her uniform shirt, while Matteo's thumb brushed across her bottom lip with maddening slowness. "So responsive already," Matteo murmured. "This is going to be incredible." Then they stepped back, leaving her standing there flushed and confused and aching in places she'd never paid attention to before. "That's enough for tonight," Dante said. "We're not going to rush this. We're going to savor every moment of teaching you, of watching you discover what your body can do." They left without another word, and Sienna collapsed onto her bunk, her whole body trembling. She pressed her hands to her burning cheeks and tried to understand what had just happened. She'd been touched, barely touched, and her entire body had responded like she'd been set on fire. She could still feel the ghost of Dante's finger on her skin, could still feel the pressure of Matteo's thumb on her lip. This was going to be so much more complicated than she'd imagined. Over the next week, the twins continued their campaign of slow seduction. They never did anything overt, nothing that could be clearly labeled as inappropriate. But every interaction left Sienna more confused and wanting. A hand on her lower back when they passed her in the corridor, lingering just a moment too long. Whispered comments about how beautiful she looked, about how they couldn't wait to teach her everything. Casual touches that seemed innocent but left trails of fire on her skin. They were teaching her to crave their attention, to anticipate their presence, to feel disappointed when a day passed without contact. It was manipulation of the highest order, and Sienna knew it, but couldn't seem to stop herself from falling into their trap. The other inmates noticed. Some looked at her with envy, others with pity, but all kept their distance. Being claimed by the Cruz twins meant safety from other threats, but it also meant isolation. Nobody wanted to risk angering the twins by getting too close to their chosen target. Sienna found herself increasingly alone, except when Dante and Matteo sought her out. They'd appear during her work shifts, during yard time, during the brief evening hours when inmates were allowed to socialize. Always together, always overwhelming, always pushing her boundaries just a little bit further. 2 weeks in, they called her to one of the empty interrogation rooms, claiming they needed to interview her about potential contraband in her cell. She knew it was a lie, knew they just wanted privacy, but she went because refusing wasn't really an option. The interrogation room was small and windowless, containing only a metal table and 3 chairs. Matteo locked the door behind them, and Sienna's pulse jumped. "Sit," Dante commanded, pointing to one of the chairs. She sat, hyper-aware of how small the room was, how close they were, how completely isolated she was from anyone who might interrupt. "We've been very patient with you," Dante said, perching on the edge of the table directly in front of her. "We've taken things slowly, let you adjust, but I think it's time we move to the next stage of your education." "What education?" Sienna asked, though her voice came out breathier than she intended. Matteo came to stand behind her chair, his hands settling on her shoulders. "Teaching you about pleasure, about your body, about what it means to be touched by men who know exactly what they're doing." Sienna tried to stand, but Matteo's hands held her in place, not painfully, but firmly enough that she understood struggling would be pointless. "We're not going to hurt you," Dante said, his voice dropping to that rough honey tone that made her stomach flip. "We're not going to take anything you're not ready to give, but we are going to start teaching you what your body can do when it's in the right hands." "I don't want," Sienna started, but Matteo's fingers began massaging her shoulders, finding knots of tension she didn't know she had, and the words died in her throat. "Your mouth says you don't want this," Dante observed, leaning forward so his face was inches from hers. "But your body tells a different story. Look at you, pupils dilated, breathing fast, skin flushed. You want this, Sienna. You're just scared to admit it." "I'm not scared," she lied. "Then, prove it," he challenged. "Let us touch you. Let us show you how good it can feel. If at any point you genuinely want us to stop, say the word red and we'll stop immediately. But I don't think you'll want us to stop." Matteo's hands moved from her shoulders to her neck, tilting her head back so she was looking up at him. "Trust us," he said softly. "We're going to take such good care of you." Sienna knew this was wrong, knew she should refuse, knew she was about to cross a line she couldn't uncross. But she was also tired of being afraid, tired of always being in control, tired of the loneliness that had defined her entire life. And underneath all the fear was curiosity, burning, desperate curiosity about what they would do, how they would touch her, whether the pleasure they promised was real or just manipulation. "Okay," she whispered, "but if I say red, you stop." "Absolutely," Dante confirmed. "Your safety and comfort come first. We want you willing and eager, not scared and forced." He stood and pulled her to her feet, and then his mouth was on hers, and Sienna's entire world narrowed to that single point of contact. She'd been kissed before, clumsy, fumbling attempts by boys who didn't know what they were doing. This was nothing like that. Dante kissed like he owned her, his tongue sliding against hers with confident skill, his hands cupping her face to angle her exactly where he wanted her. It was overwhelming and perfect and made her knees weak. When he finally pulled back, Sienna was breathing hard and clinging to his shoulders for balance. Before she could recover, Matteo was turning her around and claiming her mouth with equal intensity, his kiss slightly softer than his brother's, but no less consuming. They passed her between them like that, taking turns kissing her until she was dizzy and aching and completely lost in sensation. Their hands roamed her body over her clothes at first, learning her shape but gradually growing bolder. When Dante's hand cupped the soft curve where her thigh met hip, Sienna gasped into Matteo's mouth. When Matteo's fingers traced the line of her spine, she arched into his touch without thinking. "So perfect," Dante murmured against her ear when it was his turn again. "So responsive. Do you feel how your body wants this? How it's begging for more?" She did feel it, the ache building between her legs, the way her skin seemed to burn wherever they touched, the desperate need for something she couldn't name. "Please," she heard herself say, though she didn't know what she was begging for. "Not yet," Matteo said, his hands sliding down to grip her hips. "We're going to take our time with you. We're going to learn every inch of your body, every sound you make, everything that brings you pleasure. And then, when you're so desperate you can't think straight, we're going to give you exactly what you need." They continued their exploration, their touches growing bolder but never crossing into territory that would take her innocence. They were masterful at building arousal, at pushing her to the edge of overwhelm, and then backing off just enough to keep her wanting more. By the time they finally stepped back, Sienna was trembling and flushed, her lips swollen from their kisses, her body aching with unfulfilled need. "That's lesson 1, Dante said, his voice rough with his own barely restrained desire. "Tomorrow we'll continue your education, and Sienna, don't touch yourself tonight. Don't try to relieve this ache on your own. That pleasure belongs to us now." They left her there in the interrogation room, and it took Sienna several minutes before she could trust her legs to carry her back to her cell. When she finally made it, her cellmate took one look at her and laughed. "They got you good, didn't they? Word of advice, enjoy it while it lasts. The Cruz twins are amazing at making you feel special, at making you feel like you're the only one, but they always move on eventually. Don't mistake good sex for love." But Sienna barely heard her. She was too busy trying to process everything that had just happened, trying to understand how her body could betray her so completely, trying to figure out how she was going to survive the next 5.5 months of this exquisite torture. She lay in her bunk that night, fighting the urge to touch herself despite their command. Her body ached with need, every nerve ending alive and sensitive in a way she'd never experienced. She could still feel their hands on her skin, could still taste them on her lips. This was just the beginning, she realized. They were going to systematically dismantle every defense she had. We're going to teach her body to crave them. We're going to own her pleasure completely. And God help her, she wanted it. Despite the danger, despite the wrongness of it all, despite knowing this could only end in heartbreak, she wanted every moment they were willing to give her. The next morning at breakfast, Sienna could barely look at the twins when they appeared at her table. Her face heated, remembering what had happened in the interrogation room, remembering how thoroughly they'd kissed her, how her body had responded to their touch. "Sleep well?" Dante asked, amusement clear in his voice. "Fine," Sienna lied, though the dark circles under her eyes told a different story. "Liar," Matteo said fondly. "I bet you lay awake thinking about us, about what we did to you, about what we're going to do next." He was exactly right, and Sienna hated how transparent she was. "Eat your breakfast," Dante commanded. "You're going to need your strength for later." The day dragged by with agonizing slowness. Sienna tried to focus on her library duties, but all she could think about was what later would bring. Would they kiss her again? Touch her more intimately? How far would they push her boundaries this time? When evening finally came and she was summoned to the interrogation room again, Sienna's whole body was thrumming with anticipation and nerves. This time when she entered, she found that they'd changed the setup. The table and chairs were gone, replaced by a thin mat on the floor, the kind used in the prison gym. "We thought you might be more comfortable lying down for tonight's lesson," Matteo explained, locking the door behind her. Sienna's heart hammered. "What are you going to do?" "We're going to teach you about your own pleasure," Dante said. "We're going to show you what your body can do when you let go of control and just feel." He approached her slowly, giving her time to back away if she wanted to. But Sienna stood her ground, even though her legs felt shaky. "Lie down on the mat," Dante instructed. "And remember, if you want us to stop at any point, just say red." Sienna lowered herself to the mat, acutely aware of how vulnerable this position made her. The twins knelt on either side of her, and the weight of their attention made her skin prickle. "We're going to touch you," Matteo said. "Over your clothes at first, but we're going to find every sensitive spot on your body. We're going to learn what makes you gasp, what makes you moan, what makes you beg." "I won't beg," Sienna said, trying to hold on to some pride. Dante smiled. "Yes, you will. Before this is over, you'll beg so pretty for us." Then they began. Their hands started at her shoulders, both twins working in perfect synchronization as if they'd done this 1,000 times before. Firm pressure that eased the tension she'd been carrying. Thumbs finding knots and working them loose until Sienna couldn't help the small sound of relief that escaped her lips. "There's our girl," Matteo murmured. "Let us hear you. Let us know what feels good." The massage moved lower, down her arms, across her collarbone, always over the scratchy fabric of her uniform, but somehow still electrifying. They took their time, mapping every inch of her upper body, learning which touches made her breath hitch and which made her arch into their hands. When Dante's fingers traced down her sides, finding the sensitive spots along her ribs, Sienna squirmed involuntarily. "Ticklish?" he asked, amusement in his voice. "A little," she admitted breathlessly. We'll remember that, Matteo said, his hand splaying across her stomach, the heat of his palm burning through the fabric. Every response, every reaction, we're cataloging it all, building a map of your pleasure. Their touches grew bolder, more intentional, hands sliding down her legs, finding the sensitive skin behind her knees, the arch of her feet, then working back up, thumbs pressing into her inner thighs in a way that made her core clench with want. Sienna's breathing had gone ragged, her body responding to their skilled touches in ways she'd never imagined. She was hyper-aware of every point of contact, of the heat building between her legs, of the ache that was becoming almost painful in its intensity. "Please," she heard herself whisper, though she didn't know what she was asking for. "Not yet," Dante said, his voice rough with his own restraint. "We told you we'd make you beg, and we meant it. But first, we're going to show you what your body can do with just our hands." One of them, she'd lost track of who was where, pressed firmly against the soft mound between her legs, right over her uniform, and Sienna's whole body jolted with the sensation. "So sensitive," Matteo breathed. "Have you ever touched yourself here, Sienna? Have you ever given yourself pleasure?" Her face burned. "That's private." "Nothing about you is private anymore," Dante reminded her. "Answer the question." "Sometimes," she admitted in a whisper. "But it never felt like this." "Like what?" Matteo prompted, his fingers tracing circles that were driving her mad. "Like I'm going to shatter into a million pieces." "That's exactly what we want," Dante said. "We want you to fall apart for us. Let go, Sienna. Stop thinking and just feel." The pressure increased, became more focused, and Sienna felt herself climbing toward something she'd never quite reached on her own. The pleasure built and built, waves of sensation that seemed to originate from where they touched her, but radiated through her entire body. "That's it," Matteo encouraged. "You're so close. I can feel your body trembling. Just let go." And she did. The climax crashed over her with an intensity that stole her breath, her back arching off the mat as pleasure rolled through her in waves. She cried out, unable to contain the sound, her hands fisting in the mat beneath her as her body shook with the force of it. They kept touching her through it, prolonging the sensation until she was gasping and oversensitive, trying to squirm away from the intensity. "Beautiful," Dante said, when she finally collapsed back onto the mat, boneless and trembling. "Absolutely perfect." Sienna lay there trying to catch her breath, her mind spinning. They'd just made her come without even removing her clothes, without actually touching her skin. What would it be like when they did? "That's lesson 2, Matteo said, helping her sit up. "Your body is capable of so much pleasure, Sienna, and we're going to spend the next 5 months teaching you exactly how much." They walked her back to her cell in a daze, and Sienna spent that night replaying every moment, every touch, every sensation. She was in so much deeper than she'd ever intended to be. The pattern continued over the following weeks. Every few days, they'd summon her to the interrogation room and push her boundaries a little further. They introduced her to kissing that left her dizzy, to touches that made her writhe, to sensations she'd never dreamed possible. They were patient and thorough, never rushing, always making sure she was comfortable, even as they systematically dismantled every defense she had. And Sienna found herself falling, not just into pleasure, but into something that felt dangerously like real feelings. She started to notice the differences between them more clearly. Dante was intensity and control, always pushing her just a little further, always demanding more. Matteo was warmth and encouragement, praising her responses, making her feel safe even as they explored forbidden territory. Together, they were overwhelming. A month into her sentence, things escalated. They called her to the interrogation room, and she found them waiting with an expression that made her stomach flip. "Tonight we're taking the next step," Dante said. "We're going to remove your uniform. We're going to see all of you." Sienna's pulse jumped. "I'm not ready." "Yes, you are," Matteo said gently. "Your body's ready. We've prepared you for this. But if you truly don't want to, say red and we'll stop." The word hovered on her lips, but she couldn't make herself say it. Because the truth was, she did want this. wanted to know what it felt like to be naked under their gazes, wanted to experience everything they'd been promising. "Okay," she whispered. They undressed her slowly, reverently, treating each piece of clothing like a gift being unwrapped. When she was finally bare before them, Sienna fought the urge to cover herself. "Don't hide," Dante commanded. "You're beautiful, every inch of you." They touched her then, skin to skin for the first time, and Sienna thought she might combust from the sensation. Their hands were warm and sure, exploring every curve, every sensitive spot, building her arousal until she was trembling and desperate. "Please," she begged past caring about pride. "We know what you need," Matteo assured her, "and we're going to give it to you." They brought her to climax twice that night, their skilled fingers finding places inside her that made stars burst behind her eyes. And through it all, they whispered praise and encouragement, making her feel cherished even as they thoroughly claimed her body. "We're going to make love to you soon," Dante said afterward as they helped her dress. "Not tonight. You need more time to adjust. But soon, Sienna. Soon we're going to fill you completely." The promise sent heat flooding through her again, and Sienna realized she was counting down the days until they did. 2 months in, everything changed. Sienna was in the library when she overheard 2 guards talking in the hallway. She wouldn't have paid attention except that she heard the twins' names. "The Cruz brothers are getting transferred," one guard said. "End of the month. New facility upstate needs experienced officers." Sienna's heart stopped. They were leaving? She spent the rest of the day in a daze trying to process this information. When the twins summoned her that evening, she confronted them immediately. "Is it true? Are you being transferred?" Dante and Matteo exchanged a look. "Where did you hear that?" "Is it true?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "Yes," Matteo admitted. "We've been offered positions at a higher security facility, better pay, better opportunities for advancement." "When were you going to tell me?" Sienna asked, tears burning her eyes. "We were waiting for the right time," Dante said. "We didn't want to upset you." "Upset me?" Sienna laughed bitterly. "You've spent 2 months seducing me, making me trust you, making me want you, and you were planning to just leave without saying anything." "It's not like that," Matteo said, reaching for her. Sienna stepped back. "Then what is it like? Was this all just a game to you? A way to pass the time until something better came along?" "You know it wasn't," Dante said firmly. "What we have is real." "If it's real, then don't go," Sienna said desperately. "Stay, please." "We can't," Matteo said gently. "This opportunity is too good to pass up." "But Sienna, just because we're leaving doesn't mean this is over." "How can it not be over?" she asked. "I have 4 more months here. You'll be hours away. We'll never see each other again." Dante pulled her into his arms despite her resistance. "We'll figure it out. When you're released, we'll be waiting. This isn't goodbye, Sienna. It's just a pause." But Sienna couldn't believe him. She'd learned early in life that people left, that promises meant nothing, that the only person she could rely on was herself. "I want to go back to my cell," she said, pulling away from him. "Sienna," Matteo started. "Now," she insisted. "I want to go back now." They let her go, and Sienna spent that night crying into her pillow, mourning something she'd known from the beginning could never last. The twins tried to talk to her over the next few days, but Sienna avoided them as much as possible. She went back to eating alone, to keeping her head down, to building those walls back up that they'd so carefully dismantled. A week before they were scheduled to leave, Dante cornered her in the library. "We need to talk," he said, blocking her path. "There's nothing to talk about," Sienna said, trying to step around him. He didn't move. "Yes, there is. You're shutting us out, and we need to understand why." "You're leaving," Sienna said flatly. "What else is there to understand?" "That this doesn't have to end," Dante insisted. "We told you. When you get out, we'll be there. We want to continue this, Sienna. We want to see where this goes." "You want to continue what exactly?" Sienna challenged. "You've never even made love to me. You've touched me, yes. You've made me feel things I've never felt. But you're leaving before we could... Understanding dawned in Dante's eyes. You think we were just playing with you, that we were never serious about taking your innocence. Weren't you? Sienna asked, hating how vulnerable she sounded. Dante's jaw clenched. Meet us in the interrogation room tonight. If you still think this is a game after that, then we'll leave you alone. That evening, Sienna found herself outside the interrogation room, her hand on the door, trying to decide if she was brave enough to walk through it. Finally, she pushed it open. Both twins were waiting for her. The room had been transformed. Blankets on the floor, candles, which were definitely against regulation, creating an atmosphere that was almost romantic despite the concrete walls. "What is this?" Sienna asked. "This is us showing you that you're not just a game," Matteo said. "This is us proving that what we feel for you is real." "Tonight," Dante said, "if you're willing, we're going to make love to you properly. We're going to claim your innocence, and we're going to make damn sure you never forget us." Sienna's heart pounded. "Both of you? If that's what you want," Matteo said. "We can take turns, or one of us can wait. Whatever makes you comfortable." "I want both of you," Sienna heard herself say. "I want everything." They undressed her slowly, worshipfully, their hands and mouths covering every inch of skin they revealed. When she was finally bare, they stepped back to remove their own clothes, and Sienna's breath caught at the sight of them. They were magnificent. All hard muscle and smooth skin, and masculine beauty that made her mouth water. And between their legs, the evidence of their desire for her was impossible to miss. "Don't be scared," Matteo said, seeing her eyes widen. "We'll go slow. We'll make sure you're ready." They laid her down on the blankets and devoted themselves to her pleasure, their mouths and hands finding every sensitive spot, building her arousal until she was writhing and begging. When Matteo's fingers slid inside her, preparing her, stretching her, the sensation was intense, but not painful. "You're so perfect," he murmured, "so responsive. We're going to make this so good for you." When he finally positioned himself at her entrance, Sienna was trembling with anticipation and nerves. "Look at me," Matteo commanded. "I want to see your eyes when I make you mine." He pushed inside slowly, carefully, and there was a moment of sharp pain that made Sienna gasp. Matteo held still, letting her adjust, his hand stroking her face with infinite gentleness. "Breathe," he encouraged. "The pain will pass. Just breathe." And he was right. After a moment, the discomfort faded, replaced by a sense of fullness that felt overwhelming and perfect. When he finally began to move, Sienna understood what all those romance novels had been trying to describe. This was connection. This was intimacy. This was two bodies joining in the most primal way possible. Matteo made love to her with patience and skill, bringing her to climax before finding his own release. And then Dante was there, giving her a moment to recover before beginning his own claiming. Where Matteo had been gentle, Dante was intense, driving into her with controlled power that made her see stars. He pushed her further, demanded more, and Sienna gave him everything she had. By the time they were done, Sienna was wrung out and trembling, her body marked by their touches, her innocence thoroughly claimed by both of them. They held her between them afterward, and Sienna felt tears slip down her cheeks, not from pain, but from the overwhelming emotion of what had just happened. "We love you," Matteo said quietly. "We should have said it before, but we're saying it now. We love you, Sienna." "Both of us," Dante confirmed. "This isn't casual, this isn't temporary. We're in this for real." "I love you too," Sienna whispered, finally admitting what she'd been feeling for weeks. "Both of you, and I'm terrified because you're leaving, and I don't know how this works. We'll figure it out," Dante promised. 4 months isn't that long. We'll write, we'll call when we can, and the moment you're released, we'll be there." "How can you be sure?" Sienna asked. "How do you know you won't meet someone else, someone less complicated?" "Because there is no one else like you," Matteo said firmly. "We've been with women before, Sienna, many women, but none of them have ever touched our hearts the way you have. You're it for us, the one we've been waiting for, without even knowing we were waiting." "What about the fact that there are two of you?" Sienna asked. "How does that even work in the real world?" Dante smiled. "We've always known we'd share a woman eventually. We're twins. We've shared everything our entire lives. It was never a question of if, just a matter of finding someone special enough. And then you walked into our prison looking scared and defiant and absolutely beautiful. And we both knew. We're not letting you go, Mateo added. No matter how complicated it gets, we'll find a way to make this work. They made love again that night, slower and more tender. And when Sienna finally had to return to her cell, she felt different, changed. No longer the scared girl who'd entered Blackwood 2 months ago, but a woman who knew what she wanted and was brave enough to fight for it. The final week before the twins' transfer was bittersweet. They spent every possible moment together, stealing kisses in empty corridors, holding hands when no one was looking, making love in the interrogation room whenever they could manage it. On their last night, the twins gave Sienna a small box. "You can't keep it in your cell," Dante warned, "but we wanted you to have something to remember us by." Inside was a delicate silver chain with 2 pendants, one marked M, one marked D. "When you get out," Mateo said, "we want you to wear this, as a promise that you're ours and we're yours." Sienna hid the necklace in the library, in a book she knew no one else ever touched, and tried not to cry as she realized tomorrow they'd be gone. The next morning, Sienna stood in the yard, watching as the twins walked out through the main gates for the last time. They'd said their goodbyes privately, but Dante turned at the last moment and found her in the crowd. Even from a distance, she saw him mouth the words, "We'll be waiting." The next 4 months were the hardest of Sienna's life. Without the twins' protection, she had to navigate the prison hierarchy on her own. But she'd learned from them how to project confidence, how to read situations, how to stand her ground. She threw herself into her work detail, into the books in the library, into counting down the days until her release. The twins wrote her letters, carefully worded to pass the censors, but filled with affection and promises of their future together. Sienna wrote back, telling them about her days, about the plans she was making for when she got out, about how much she missed them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, her release day arrived. Sienna walked out of Blackwood Correctional Facility with nothing but the clothes on her back and a bus ticket to the city where the twins were now working. Her heart pounded as the taxi drove her to the address they'd given her, a modest apartment in a decent neighborhood. She stood outside the door for a long moment, suddenly terrified. What if they'd changed their minds? What if this had all been a fantasy that couldn't survive in the real world? Before she could knock, the door swung open and there they were, Dante and Mateo, looking even more handsome in civilian clothes than they had in uniform. "You came," Mateo breathed, pulling her into his arms. "Did you think I wouldn't?" Sienna asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "We hoped," Dante said, joining the embrace, "but we know how scary this must be." They pulled her inside, and Sienna looked around at what was clearly meant to be her home too. They'd set up a room for her, had stocked the kitchen with food, had made space in their lives for her in a way that made tears prick her eyes. "We meant everything we said," Mateo told her. "We love you, we want to build a life with you. And we know it's going to be complicated and unconventional, but we don't care." "I don't care either," Sienna said. "I love you both. I want this." That night, they made love in a real bed for the first time, with no time limits and no fear of discovery. They took their time, relearning each other's bodies, celebrating their reunion with passion and tenderness. And in the morning, Sienna woke up between them and realized that for the first time in her life, she was home. The adjustment to life outside prison wasn't easy. Sienna had to find work, had to navigate the strange dynamic of being in a relationship with 2 men, had to deal with the judgmental looks when people figured out their situation. But Dante and Mateo stood by her through everything. They helped her find a job at a bookstore, helped her enroll in community college classes, helped her build the life she dreamed of before everything went wrong. 6 months after her release, Sienna came home to find the apartment filled with candles and roses. "What's all this?" she asked. The twins knelt before her, each holding a ring. "We can't legally marry you," Dante said. "Not both of us, but we want you to know that in our hearts, you're our wife." "Will you commit to us?" Matteo asked. "Will you build this life with us, unconventional as it is?" Sienna looked at these two men who had seen her at her most vulnerable, who had claimed her innocence and her heart, who had waited for her and fought for her and loved her despite every obstacle. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll be yours, forever." They slipped matching rings on her fingers, one from each of them, and Sienna slipped the necklace they'd given her around her neck, the M&D pendants resting over her heart. That night, they celebrated their commitment the best way they knew how, with passion and love and the promise of forever. A year later, Sienna graduated from community college with an associate's degree. 2 years later, she transferred to a 4-year university. 3 years later, she walked across the stage with a bachelor's degree in literature, and both Dante and Matteo were in the audience cheering. They built a life together that was beautiful in its unconventionality. Some people judged them, but most of their friends and chosen family accepted that love came in all forms. Sienna went on to become a teacher, working with at-risk youth and helping kids who came from backgrounds like hers. Dante and Matteo continued their work in corrections, but now focused on rehabilitation programs rather than just security. 5 years after they met, they bought a house together, a real home with room for all of them and the future they were building. And sometimes, late at night when they were all tangled together in bed, Sienna would think about that scared girl in orange who'd walked into Blackwood Correctional and couldn't imagine ever feeling safe again. That girl had learned that sometimes the most unlikely circumstances led to the greatest love. That sometimes what looked like a trap was actually a doorway to freedom. That sometimes surrendering control was the bravest thing you could do. She'd learned that love didn't have to look like what society expected. That family could be 3 people who chose each other every single day. That home wasn't a place. It was the people who saw you completely and loved you anyway. 10 years after that first night in the interrogation room, Sienna stood in their backyard watching Dante and Matteo play with the twins' younger sister's kids, and felt gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She'd been to prison and found freedom. She'd surrendered her innocence and discovered power. She'd been claimed by 2 men and learned what it meant to truly belong. And every single day, she thanked whatever fate had led her to that processing room where a kind officer had warned her about the Cruz twins. Beautiful trouble that ruins women. She'd been ruined, yes. Ruined for anyone else, for any other kind of love, for any life that didn't include both of them. But she'd also been saved, cherished, loved beyond measure. Matteo caught her eye from across the yard and smiled, that soft, warm smile that still made her heart skip. Dante followed his brother's gaze and his expression softened into something tender that transformed his usually intense features. They excused themselves from the kids and crossed to where she stood, flanking her the way they always had, the way they always would. "What are you thinking about?" Matteo asked, sliding his arm around her waist. "Just how far we've come," Sienna said. "How different my life could have been if I'd never met you." "We were inevitable," Dante said with certainty. "The moment you walked into that prison, your fate was sealed. We saw you and knew you were ours." "Possessive as always," Sienna teased, but she pressed closer to him anyway. "Always," he confirmed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We own you, remember?" "And I own you both," Sienna reminded him. "That's how this works." "That's exactly how this works," Matteo agreed. They stood there in their backyard, the 3 of them together as they'd been for a decade, as they would be for all the decades to come. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange that reminded Sienna of prison uniforms and new beginnings. "I have something to tell you both," Sienna said suddenly, her heart racing with nervous excitement. Dante and Matteo immediately focused on her, concern flickering across their faces. "What is it?" Matteo asked gently. "Are you okay?" Sienna smiled, reaching for both their hands. I'm more than okay. I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air for a heartbeat, and then both men erupted into action. Matteo swept her into his arms, spinning her around while Dante laughed, a sound of pure joy that she so rarely heard from him. "Are you serious?" Dante asked when Matteo finally set her down. "We're going to be fathers?" "Yes," Sienna confirmed, tears streaming down her face. "I'm about 8 weeks along. I wanted to wait until I was sure before telling you." "How long have you known?" Matteo asked, his hand coming to rest on her still flat stomach with reverent care. "A week," Sienna admitted. "I took 3 tests just to be certain. I have a doctor's appointment scheduled for next week." Dante pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "We're going to have a baby," he said, wonder coloring his voice. "Our baby." "Our baby," Sienna confirmed. "I know we've talked about this possibility, but now that it's real, I'm terrified and excited and so incredibly happy." "We're going to be amazing parents," Matteo said with absolute certainty. "All 3 of us together." That night, after calling their closest friends and family with the news, after celebrating with sparkling cider and laughter, Sienna lay between her 2 loves and felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. "What do you think it'll be?" Matteo asked, his hand splayed across her stomach. "Boy or girl?" "I don't care," Dante said from her other side, "as long as they're healthy and happy." "They're going to be so loved," Sienna murmured, "so incredibly loved by all 3 of us." The pregnancy was both easier and harder than Sienna expected. Morning sickness hit hard in the first trimester, and both Dante and Matteo were there through every miserable moment, holding her hair, bringing her crackers, making sure she stayed hydrated. As her belly grew, they became even more protective. Dante insisted on driving her everywhere, worried about her being behind the wheel. Matteo cooked elaborate healthy meals, researching nutrition for pregnant women with the same intensity he brought to everything else. "You're both going to smother me," Sienna complained one evening as Dante adjusted her pillows for the 3rd time while Matteo brought her yet another glass of water. "Get used to it," Dante said, unapologetically. "We've waited 10 years for this. We're going to enjoy every moment." At the 20-week ultrasound, they discovered they were having a girl. Sienna watched both men cry as they looked at the grainy image of their daughter on the screen and felt her heart expand even further. "She's perfect," Matteo whispered, his fingers interlaced with Sienna's. "Just like her mother," Dante added, pressing a kiss to Sienna's temple. They converted the spare room into a nursery, painting it a soft lavender and filling it with books and toys and everything a little girl could need. Sienna's friends from work threw her a baby shower, and she was overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and support. On a crisp autumn evening, 3 weeks before her due date, Sienna went into labor. Dante remained calm and focused, timing contractions and making sure everything was ready. Matteo was a nervous wreck, checking on her constantly, holding her hand through every contraction. "You're doing so good," Matteo murmured as they rushed to the hospital. "So strong, so perfect." "I'm terrified," Sienna admitted through gritted teeth as another contraction hit. "We're right here," Dante assured her from the driver's seat. "We're not going anywhere." 15 hours later, after the most intense experience of her life, Sienna held their daughter in her arms. She was perfect. Tiny and pink with a shock of dark hair and lungs that announced her arrival to the entire maternity ward. "She's beautiful," Matteo said, tears streaming down his face as he touched one tiny hand. "She has your eyes," Dante told Sienna, his own eyes bright with emotion. They named her Hope, because that's what she represented. Hope for the future, hope for their unconventional family, hope that love really could conquer every obstacle. In the quiet hours of that first night, with Hope sleeping in Sienna's arms and both Dante and Matteo crowded onto the hospital bed with her, Sienna reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that first terrifying day at Blackwood Correctional to this perfect moment, she'd been transformed. She'd learned to trust, to love, to surrender control. She'd discovered that family wasn't defined by blood or convention, but by choice and commitment. "What are you thinking about?" Dante asked softly, careful not to wake the baby. "Just how far we've come," Sienna said. "How that scared girl in prison never could have imagined this. A beautiful home, two men who love her completely, and now this perfect little person. You were always meant for this, Mateo said. For love, for family, for happiness. You just needed to find the right people to show you. And you needed us to be patient enough to let you discover it at your own pace, Dante added. Hope stirred in Sienna's arms, making small sounds that tugged at her heart. She looked down at her daughter's face and saw the future there. First steps and first words, school plays and graduations, all the moments they would share as a family. I love you both, Sienna said. Thank you for never giving up on me, for waiting for me, for loving me even when I didn't know how to love myself. Thank you for being brave enough to take a chance on us, Mateo replied, for trusting us with your heart. We're going to give her everything, Dante promised, gently stroking Hope's cheek. Love, stability, the knowledge that she's wanted and cherished. She's never going to doubt for a moment that she belongs. Just like her mother, Mateo said, smiling at Sienna. As the night deepened and Hope slept peacefully, Sienna felt a completeness she'd never known existed. This was her family. Unconventional, yes, but built on a foundation of genuine love and unwavering commitment. The processing officer at Blackwood had warned her about the Cruz twins, beautiful trouble that ruins women. And she'd been right. They had ruined Sienna for any other life, any other love, any other version of happiness. But in that ruin, she'd found salvation. In that surrender, she'd found strength. In that darkness, she'd discovered the brightest light. And now, holding her daughter while surrounded by the two men who had shown her what love really meant, Sienna knew with absolute certainty that every moment of struggle had been worth it. Every tear, every fear, every leap of faith had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Home, loved, complete. She'd entered Blackwood Correctional as a scared girl paying for someone else's mistakes. She'd left as a woman who knew her own strength, her own worth, her own heart. And in between, she'd been loved by two men who'd shown her that sometimes the darkest places held the brightest light, that sometimes being caged led to the truest freedom, that sometimes surrendering everything was how you found yourself. If this story reminded you that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, that healing can come from the most unlikely sources, and that family is what you make it, subscribe to the channel and let us